Pam Sokol, Chair of the Jewish United Fund in Chicago. Welcome to the session, A New Kind of Trust, Unprecedented Collaboration in Unprecedented Times. Thank you for joining us today. Recordings of this session and all other workshops will be available online after the GA ends. I do hope you'll also join us this evening at 7 Eastern for the Federation Together plenary. For at least the past 30 years, we've mostly experienced a time of abundance in the Jewish world. Organizations have grown and each of our agendas has expanded. We've been able to find our own way, leaning on each other collegially, but not necessarily because our work is linked together. But we are in a different world now. Our expectations of resources shift depending on the day. It's possible that we'll have fewer and partnerships will be forced by shrinking budgets. Even beyond finances, we need each other. This world is too hard for us to figure out alone. We do better work when we have each other. We will hear today from and about 3 remarkable collaborations. The Jewish Community Recovery and Impact Fund, or JCRIF, represents philanthropists accustomed to setting their own rules, learning to build Jewish life together. Summer in the Cloud, supported through a JCRIF grant, involved 18 Jewish community centers across the New York area collaborating on a program, Summer Camp, around which they are usually competitors. J-Life began well before COVID, but it is a part of the conversation because it offers us an image of the kind of partnership across organizations and even across communities that we will benefit from in our future. Eliza Mazur, who has decades of experience in organizational growth and development, will be framing and facilitating this conversation today, drawing out lessons about collaboration for all of us. I'm pleased to welcome our speakers for the workshop, Felicia Herman, Director of the JCRIF Aligned Grant Fund and Executive Director of the Natan Fund, Barry Feinstone, CEO of the Jim Joseph Foundation, Alan Scher, Associate Executive Director of the 14th Street Y, Martine Yaffe, Chief Program Officer, YM and YWHA of Washington Heights, Yair Slack, CEO of the Federation CJA in Montreal, Brian Siegel, CEO of the JCC of Metro Detroit, and as I mentioned, Eliza Mazur, Chief Field Building Officer of Upstart. So everyone, welcome. And now, Eliza, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pam, and welcome everybody to this conversation. Even though we're a large group, I really hope we can make this into a conversation because there's a lot of interesting stuff to unpack here. I think we would all agree that this has been a dark and difficult 6 months for many, many, many reasons. But one of the upsides of this dark period has been seeing organizations become more agile, let go of old norms, and embrace new ways of doing business. A lot of this has been humbling, powerful, and long overdue for our sector. And today's conversation is going to be about new models of collaboration and is intended to really feed the momentum that has been started. We want to emphasize here the difference between casual collaboration, which is sort of low stakes, parallel play, kind of we'll do something together, to strategic partnerships and alliances, which each of the 3 examples that we're going to share today really fit that definition of coming together with intention, focusing on impact, and really figuring out what it is that we can accomplish together that we cannot accomplish alone. We believe that in this process of organizations figuring out new ways of collaboration and deeper ways of collaboration, that COVID has served as an accelerant. There's, as Pam mentioned, there's less abundance in the marketplace, and we are more concerned than ever before about preserving ideas and talent and letting go of structures that may not be working for us anymore. In today's panel, we're going to feature 3 strategic partnerships. And one of the interesting things I think about these particular 3 partnerships is that in each case, there's a set of partners that came together to solve a problem and engaged other partners in part of that solution. So one of the things that you'll really see in the 3 examples we're going to dive into are a kind of multiplier effect of a deep partnership at the top, making something happen and bringing lots of partners into the process. So we're going to go forward with our panel. Each set of panelists is going to introduce themselves and say a little bit more about their particular partnership, share the story of how the partnership came together and some of what they've learned along the way. We're going to ask each of them to reflect a little bit on the role that this unique moment in time of COVID and everything else has impacted the partnership. Before we start, I'm going to do 1 minute of Zoom housekeeping. We really want everybody to participate in this session. We know it's frontal, but we hope that we can also make it conversational. There is going to be some polls in a little bit, and we'll invite you to participate in the polls. And there is also a Q&A function on your Zoom. Feel free to drop in questions as you hear our speakers present their partnerships, and we'll get to those questions a little bit later in the session. And we may even open the chat later on and try an experiment of what it's like to have 750 people on chat. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Barry Finestone of the Jim Joseph Foundations to open the conversation about the Jewish Community Response and Impact Fund. Barry.
Good morning, everybody, and good to see you all. Shavua Tov. First of all, I want to thank everybody at JFNA for putting everything together and what is, I think, a grand experiment, and very grateful to be a part of it, and grateful to have an excuse to put on a collared shirt from time to time. So thank you. I'm going to spend about the next 5 or 6 minutes giving background on the JCRIF fund that was started, and then my colleague and friend, I will pass it over to Felicia Herman, who will fill in some details on a particular piece of that. Wednesday, March 4th was the day I began to confront the immediate threat of the deadly coronavirus. I found myself in Manhattan, attending a gathering of seminary heads and others who play an active role in rabbinic training. In the afternoon, one of the participants of that convening received a call alerting her that the father of a student at her kid's school had tested positive for the virus the previous day, one of the first known cases in the region. The school, following the advice of state authorities, decided to close. We finished the convening. I went back to my hotel, woke up the next morning, and took a flight back to San Francisco. I had no idea what was about to happen, but my gut, my kishkas told me that this was different. It turns out that my dear friends and colleagues, Lisa Eisen of the Schusterman Foundation and Mark Charendoff of the Maimonides Fund, had experienced similar stories over the previous days. And in a matter of moments, we were talking multiple times a day in intense discussions that only close colleagues who trusted one another could have. I would say that for the first few weeks, it was almost like we had seconded ourselves from the day-to-day job of being in charge of the foundations that we have the privilege to lead to focus on this emergency. Relatively swiftly, we agreed on a few major items. 1, going it alone, regardless of the significant means that our foundations had at their disposal, would not be smart and would have a less than desired effect. We had coordinated before, as Aliza had mentioned a few minutes ago, but we now needed to seriously collaborate and trust one another. 2, we needed to be fast and nimble, not necessarily a major strength of the funding landscape. And 3, the needs were enormous, and therefore we needed to focus. We needed to quickly understand what gaps we could fill. And again, regardless of the assets, trying to do all things to everybody would not be possible, and it would not be smart. We came to the conclusion that it would be best for us to focus on a segment of the Jewish world that at least we and our foundations had some pretty good knowledge of. We knew the landscape and the leaders in the formal and informal education space, schools, camps, youth programs, etc. We understood the needs of their constituents, and we also had good relationships with the execs in the intermediary orgs that we could help us understand the needs and help us prioritize. From there, And after a few iterations, I think in record time and a massive flow of legal documents, we got going. A never before partnership of consultations among the three of us led to the creation of the Jewish Community Response and Impact Fund that has grown to represent 8 foundations and a pot of more than $90 million. We decided early on that it would be most effective to offer interest-free loans to qualified beneficiaries who would be able to pay over a 4-year period. The intent was simple. We wanted to invest in institutions that were being hit hard, but were at the same time relatively fundamentally sound. We wanted to help them weather the storm. We knew we couldn't solve all the problems, but if we could give the funds that would help people get through this, that would just be one important slice of the pie. We also quickly realized that some of the vital institutions needed immediate help to survive, and also that there was also an opportunity for new partnerships and collaborations that could be seeded. So we also went into the grant business as well. It is true to say that all of the foundations who are partners in this had to give up a piece of themselves for the greater good. We each had to be comfortable in allocating funds to perhaps some arenas that we don't normally fund. But this was the rainy day. In fact, it wasn't raining, it was absolutely pouring. And being from Scotland, believe me, I know what real rain looks like. The loan fund to date has approved over 50 million in loans, with the remaining 20 million in the pipeline. And the grant fund has given away millions of dollars to both shore up some institutions and at the same time seed new collaborations and programs, some of which you will hear about soon. And while it has been nice to receive some accolade for what we put into motion, the reality of JCRIF is, like all big and hopefully good ideas, they require a ton of work by a ton of people. The partnership with JF&A was crucial. Shira Hutt and her team at JF&A spend hours and hours working with applicants and providing critical information for the loan funders. My colleague, who you'll hear from shortly, Felicia Herman, manages the grant fund on behalf of the funders. Without Felicia and Shira, none of this happens. It's important to point out the work of the boards and the staff at all the funding partners and the tremendous amount of kavod that they deserve. They built muscles, changed normal philanthropic practices, and kept focused on helping those in need, and did so in record time. Lay and professional leadership working rapidly and in sync. PRIs, loans, were new to most of us, but we all dived in. On the loan side, along with the original partners, the Mandel Foundation, the Will Family Foundation, the Aviv Foundation, and the Glazer Foundation. And on the grant side, we were joined by the Singer and Aviv Foundation. Finally, and most of all, respect and honor goes to all the people in the field who work tirelessly at camps, at shuls, at JCC, at schools. We are literally witnessing the human version of the Energizer Bunny. They just keep going and going. They are really the real heroes in all of this. And I know I speak on behalf of all the foundations involved in JCRIF when I simply say it is our honor and privilege to be able to help in any way we can. It's now my great honor to introduce my friend and colleague, Felicia Herman, Executive Director of the Natan Fund. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Now's when everyone gets a little bit let down because I don't have that amazing Scottish accent, but thank you for that. And like Barry, I actually want to start with a story about the beginning of the pandemic. A friend of mine, I live in Brooklyn. A friend of mine is a doctor who works in a hospital in the middle of Brooklyn. And back at the beginning of the pandemic, we were talking basically every day, trying to process everything that was happening in our respective worlds. And one thing that she said in really early in March, as her hospital was gearing up for what they knew was going to be an onslaught of patients, was that going to work actually reminded her of Dunkirk. You know the story, the British mobilizing over 800 naval vessels and small boats from across England to rescue their troops who were stranded in France. So many people, so many boats, big and small, banding together to come to the rescue of people who needed it. So in her hospital, they were finding new rooms and repurposing equipment and getting more gloves here and more gowns there. And that idea of it being an all hands on deck moment, we're all in this together, we all have to bring whatever we can to this battle, that image has stayed with me all these months, especially through the work that I've been privileged to do working with Barry and the other funders in the JCRIF grant program. So as Barry said, JCRIF was set up in the very earliest days of the pandemic as a philanthropic partnership. And Barry used the word seconded. I'm also going to use that word. I was also seconded to running the grant program for my regular job as executive director of Natan, which is a giving circle focused on funding Jewish and Israeli social innovation. My experience at Natan, both in funding innovation and in managing philanthropic partnership, which is what a giving circle is, has proven to be very helpful in this role. And it's actually been striking to me really to see that although none of us, you see all the ways that although none of us have been through something like this before, our work over the past few months has actually been building on rather than necessarily upending the big ideas and the critical skill sets and the expertise that we've been developing for years in Jewish philanthropy and Jewish organizational life. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that from our other speakers today. So two of these big ideas are the necessity of innovation and collaboration. We now know, all of us more than ever, that institutional forms are always evolving, that the institutions of Jewish life weren't given to Moses on Mount Sinai, and that it's a good thing for them to evolve over time and for new forms to take their place. I think we never just expected it to happen quite like this, a universal experience of disruption that has forced every organization, every leader, even every follower to rethink the way that they engage with Jewish life. So collaboration is such a major piece of this. We are indeed witnessing an unprecedented amount of collaboration in Jewish communal life in both the philanthropic and organizational sectors. Some of these collaborations were already in the works and the pandemic just accelerated them, or gave organizations cover to do what they knew they needed to be doing all along. And some of these efforts are completely new, reflections of the unique challenges posed by the pandemic. I'm going to give a couple of examples of things that JCRIF has supported and seen, but I want to draw your attention also to the website. I never remember the name of the website. I should have written it down. If you Google JCRIF, Jewish Together, and grantees, you'll see all the fund recipients from the grant program. But before I give a couple of examples, I just want to zoom out for a second to offer a framing that has been really helpful to us as we have thought about the work that we're doing. So in the beginning, you'll remember people were saying, you know, which organizations are going to live and which will die. And I want to encourage us to zoom out from the question of how we preserve particular institutions, and rather to think about the questions of how we preserve particular functions that we know that Jewish communities need to thrive, and how we preserve assets that we've accumulated over time, people, ideas, and sometimes hard assets like particular institutions, their brands, their real estate even. So how can we help Jewish communities thrive into the future, even if the precise institutions that house these assets or perform these functions today don't remain the same? This is the essence of what it means to collaborate. The crisis has given everyone an opportunity to really think systemically about how institutions can adapt their structures and their programs and even their personnel to ensure the continuity of Jewish communities writ large. It's given everyone an opportunity to assess the relative strengths and weaknesses of their institutions, and to think about how we might put the puzzle pieces together in a different way moving forward. And importantly, whereas in the past, organizations had many reasons to avoid collaboration, like territorialism and ego and competition and inertia, the pandemic really has just put the kibosh on the idea that it's possible to go it alone. You really just can't. There are too many challenges, too many unknowns, and we need to band together. So let me give you a couple of examples of the kinds of powerful collaborations that we've seen happening through JCRIF, both among Jewish organizations, and then I just want to offer a couple of words also about the philanthropic collaboration that JCRIF is. So in the organizational world, I feel like we've been seeing two different kinds of collaborations, within sectors and then across sectors. We'll be hearing in a few minutes about the JCC collaboration in New York City, which is a phenomenal example of a way that more organizations than I think people even knew existed, more JCCs in New York than I think people knew about, have came together to leverage each other's strengths to provide programming. We've seen this same kind of collaboration between synagogues, between camps, between day schools. Or take the Hillel system, which brought together its entire network around the high holidays. Hillel International provided beautifully produced national services in partnership with Reboot, another collaboration, to ease the burden of providing the actual high holiday services on the local Hillels. And then that same online platform served as a mechanism for local Hillels to gather their local communities for more school-specific programming, whether they had their students on campus or not. Another within a sector collaboration is that between Yeshivat Maharat and Yeshivat Hovevei Torah, two modern Orthodox rabbinical seminaries here in New York, one for men, one for women, that banded together to offer Jewish learning to out-of-work Jewish communal professionals. And then there are the collaborations across sectors, like the JCC and Federation example that we'll hear about in a few minutes. Or Serve the Moment, an enormous brand new effort powered by Repair the World to engage young Jews across North America in over 100,000 acts of meaningful community service, virtually and in person when possible, that now has nearly 40 organizational partners, including Hillel, Birthright Israel, JDC Entwine, Moshe House, the synagogue movements, federations across the country, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, as Barry was discussing, there's the philanthropic collaboration. And I know I'm almost out of time, so I might save some additional comments on this for later. But I'll just say that there's never been anything like this in the Jewish philanthropic sector on the foundation side. And all of the things that Barry mentioned, the sharing of wisdom, the sharing of resources, the sharing between the leadership of the foundations and the staff at all levels. We've been able to put together dream teams of staff from different foundations on particular projects, things that we never could have imagined before. And it's happening constantly. We're meeting weekly. And this kind of sustained collaboration, sharing of resources, I think is going to redound to the benefit of Jewish communities for a very long time. The last thing I'll say, and I know that everyone on the panel will agree with this, is there are also profound personal benefits to collaboration, not just professional ones. It has been so good to be able to work together. And I know I don't need to tell this to a Federation audience. To be in a community of people who share your mission, to be with people who you respect and care about and can share your hopes and concerns with, that has been really a true blessing of this time for so many of us. So with that, I am very pleased to turn the stage over to Alan Schur and Martine Yaffe to tell us about their phenomenal work bringing JCCs together this summer.
Thanks, Felicia, and thank you everyone, in particular JFNA, for bringing us together today for this really important topic. Jewish Together, Federations Together is a theme that feels particularly relevant to the subject that we're discussing today, and one that is particularly inspiring to me. I also just want to recognize our incredible panel, in addition to my esteemed colleague Martine, who I'm so proud to share this proverbial figurative stage with. I'm also so grateful to the rest of the panel, in particular Barry, Felicia. As mentioned, we were a recipient of this incredible grant as part of this initiative. We couldn't have done it without you, as well as you, Beth. Thank you for organizing this. It's really been a true communal effort. So I'm here to talk with Martine about Summer in the Cloud. I came to Summer in the Cloud, frankly, as a real skeptic. Can we imagine in the midst of this unprecedented pandemic at the epicenter in New York City to bring 18 different Jewish community centers together to do anything? I mean, I'll set aside the proverbial joke of getting two Jewish people to agree on anything, 18 New York JCCs to agree on how we would run a virtual alternative to camp, like I said, I was something of a skeptic, to say nothing of the reality of replacing what is, for so many of us, I would imagine listening today, Jewish summer camp, a very sacred thing. How possibly would we be able to replace that in a virtual setting? Well, I wanted to show you a clip so that it would ground this conversation and you could understand a little bit some of the success that we had from a programmatic perspective. So cue the clip.
Hi everybody, my name is Cake Monster. I am a monster who likes to eat cake. And I also like to ask, who is it? So this is my talk show. Who is it? Who is it?
It is me, Robot Cat. Happy to be on the show.
Wow, Robot Cat, good to meet you. I look forward to talking to you more later, but right now we have some other guests. So our first guest on the show today, who is it? Scruffy. Scruffy, are you there? And where do you come from?
Hello, I'm Scruffy the dog. I come from North Carolina, or was it South Carolina? Well, anyway, bye-bye.
Oh. Oh no! Is your nose okay, Scruffy?
It's fine.
All right. Thank you, financial advisor Scruffy. All right. Up next, Jasmine, are you there and where do you come from?
Hey everybody, I'm Jasmine. I'm from SoCal. Surf's up, dude.
Oh, nice to meet you, Jasmine. Beluga Bunny, my blue friend. Are you there?
Hi, I'm Beluga Bunny. What's up?
Oh, nice to meet you. Nice to see you on the show. What is your favorite thing to do, Beluga Bunny?
Well, my favorite food is carrots, so I like to bathe in carrots too.
Oh, very luxurious. I would bathe in cake, but my fur would get sticky. All right, up next, we have Flora the flamingo. Flora, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Flora, good to see you. Flora, what is your favorite thing to do?
Well, I love to dance with my friends. My flamingo dance like this, da 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 da, and protect my eggs and make buttercream fly fish.
Wow, very fascinating stuff there. Sounds yummy, kind of. All right, up next.
I love that clip. I hope everyone else did as well. I wanted to show it because, as I said, I was something of a skeptic at first. How do you do the magic and how do you capture the magic of Jewish summer camp through a screen? And I think that illustrates in a lot of respects how we did it. How else did we do it in terms of the collaborative piece? So I wanted to bring attention in the presentation here, first and foremost, on two critical ingredients, in my estimation. Critical ingredient number one is we here in the New York area, and I would imagine in so many other areas, have over the course of many years actually sown the seeds of this collaboration. It would be inaccurate to suggest that this collaboration came from nothing because of the coronavirus. Point of fact, the collaboration in Summer in the Cloud came from years of investment and the fostering of a culture, thanks to UJA Federation of New York, thanks to JCC Association, and thanks to the many Jewish community centers and camps in our New York region who have, over the course of several years, focused their energy on creating a culture of collaboration, even as competitors. The second ingredient that felt critical to Summer in the Cloud was we took the time, and despite the fact that we were in the midst of the insanity of the springtime in New York City, we took the time and intention to set really clear goals associated with this program. We agreed on a vision for what the project would look like, clear metrics of success, and we fostered clear roles and responsibilities as partners. 3 agencies stepped forward: my agency, Educational Alliance in the 14th Street Y, the Y in Washington Heights that Martine represents, as well as the Marlene Meyerson JCC in Manhattan. And our agencies stepped up, in addition to our camp directors, to have simple, specific, clear goals on behalf of the larger Summer in the Cloud community. I'm going to pass it to my colleague Martine now to continue the conversation.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you everybody else for being with us today. It is a privilege to be talking about Summer in the Cloud because, against all odds, we were able to create what we hope and think is a great experience for the summer, despite the circumstances. So one of the questions that Eliza Mazor was asking us is, what were the problems we were trying to solve? What was actually the focus of this collaboration? And I want to situate all of us in the context in which in New York, every day there was a new decision coming from government, coming from the CDC in terms of whether we were going to be able to open camp or not able to open camp. If we were going to, what were all the conditions under which we were going to be able to operate it? So in that context, all of us were planning in parallel a virtual camp as well as an in-person camp with all the health and safety requirements. So the big problem was, are we going to open camp or not? Through a lot of conversations among our peers and colleagues in all the agencies, many of us decided that we did not feel it was safe to do it this past summer. So we were committed to opening a high quality virtual program. Some of the JCCs were still having doubts on whether they would do it or not. So that was the first problem. Once some of us decided that we were not going to open in person, then the real problem emerged. And I ask all of you to hear all the details of this important problem. Once we decided we were not operating the in-person camp, the problem to solve became how to run a safe summer program that could be as similar in essence as possible to an actual summer camp, as parent-free as possible, because we do want the parents to be able to continue working and not to be on the computer with the kids trying to link them to each one of the activities. With significant flexibility for enrollment, remember, this is a time in which we don't know what's going to happen week to week. Some families were leaving the city and going somewhere else. It wasn't easy to be able to decide in advance, I want to do 3 weeks or 4 weeks. At a price point that our hard-hit families were going to be able to enroll their children in. Among 18 agencies, remember, we had never run a virtual camp before, let alone 18 agencies together. And last but not least, in 3 to 4 weeks. So it was a big problem to solve. All of those ingredients together emerged, and we needed to make big decisions. I'll say a couple of things about why we were able to put it together. One has to do with the fact that we did find the right company that was able to help us with the technological aspect of it. So Click to Camp, which is a byproduct of Big Idea, an Israeli camp itself, they run STEM camp. They were able to create for us a technological resource that enables the children to have their own link that takes them from activity to activity without parental intervention. So it's not a link per activity, it's a link per person. So once that's already scheduled, kids were able to do it and parents were not necessarily having to be next to them on the computer. So that was key. Another aspect that we had to solve was how to make this program financially viable. All of us have been really hit by the pandemic financially. Most of our fee-for-service aspects of our organizations were actually not functioning. So we wanted to run a program that would not continue losing money for our agencies, but then many of us have lower and middle income families that were actually hit by the pandemic. So we had to do something financially viable while at the same time thinking about the families and not to overprice them. And third, we were thinking about programmatically and administratively, how can we run an efficient and equitable camp that was going to function in 3 to 4 weeks, but also it would be equitable among our own organizations, meaning which staff are we going to hire for this or that activity? How are we going to distribute the resources so it would be equitable among all of us? So having said all that, Alan was referencing before the time that we took to make strategic decisions, and I want to focus a little bit on that. First and foremost, the 3 agencies at the highest level got together to set clear parameters and establish goals before jumping into programmatic aspects. The CEOs and the chief program officers, associate CEOs of the organizations, all of us came together to endorse the fact that we were going to be running this activity. There was going to be 3 lead agencies, and all other agencies that wanted to join us were going to be partners in this endeavor. Programmatically, we made a decision early on that we were going to create a program that would have general moments for everybody to be together, like Shabbat, like the puppet activity that you were seeing before. Number two, we were going to offer high quality electives for everybody, and we're going to bring the best staff from each agency. But number three, looking into the future, we hope that we're going to be able to run in-person camp this next summer and many summers moving forward. So we also ensured that there's going to be at least 1 or 2 moments a day in which each individual camp would be able to gather to celebrate their own rituals. So the flexibility and the ability to be nimble in the creation of this camp were key aspects of it. Third, we established a financial model that we all agreed on would be, number one, supportive of the families in need. It was a very affordable virtual camp. Two, we provided incentives for all the participating agencies to be able to enroll their campers. We wanted as many campers as possible to benefit from this camp in the middle of the crisis we were facing. And third, we wanted to be equitable among the participating, or the 3 lead organizations. The last thing we did is that we effectively engaged the entire team, and especially the camp directors. They were the true heroes of this endeavor, and we divided and conquered for us to be able to guarantee the success. So one agency decided we were going to be supporting the camp operation, another agency was going to liaise with the partner agencies, and a third agency was going to work to develop the administrative aspects of this endeavor. So all in all, almost 200 campers, almost 700 camper weeks were able to join this endeavor. And in the process, what happened was amazing, because we were, as Alan said, skeptical about the ability to create community in this type of endeavor. And I have to say, at the very last meeting, when the staff came together to thank each other for what had happened, many of them started crying. And they said, I never seen you, I was never with you in the same room, but the work that we put together, we did it, we accomplished it. And it didn't matter if they were from the JCC of Manhattan, from the 14th Street Wire, the Washington Heights and Inwood. It didn't matter where they were coming from. They were all somewhere in the cloud, and a real community had been created among staff. It was so powerful to see. And Alan's going to share with us in a minute about the campers. But I would say, summing these pieces together, when there's investment in collaborations early on, when there is a series of organizations that are committed to rising to the occasion, that there's trust among us and there's boldness to be able to tackle the challenges of our time, when there's a clear process that's set in place to be able to have clarity of goal and mission and purpose, when there's mission alignment, and when there are organizations like UJA and JCRIF that can provide us with the resources to be able to run it, there is no question we're going to always be successful in these bold collaborations. Alan?
Thanks, Martine. I just wanted to end with a quick story. You know, Martine mentioned the impact that this had on the campers, and I wanted to surface that at the end of the day, we served almost 200 young people, many of which were in deep mourning about the loss of not just their summer camp experience, but just so much that New York children faced over the course of the spring. And, you know, I'll be frank and honest, I saw it firsthand in my own household. My 2 daughters both attended Summer in the Cloud, and my younger one, who was 6 at the time, I'll never forget, came to me one day in tears with her laptop. And I said, Rose, what is it? And she said to me, Daddy, I lost camp. She had, through some technological glitch, come off of camp and wasn't on the screen anymore, and was just so profoundly, you know, struck by the fact that she was off of this experience that she so intentionally was using the term camp. This program, this virtual experience that so many thought could never in any capacity replace summer in the camp, summer camp for so many children this summer, was camp this summer for so many young people. For so many young people, this created new relationships with other young people, with positive role models, and created so much learning and thriving. Thanks for listening to this portion of the presentation. I now want to throw it over to our friends in J-Life. Pass it on.
Rob, if you could cue the video.
Jewish communities that were once close-knit and concentrated within a few city miles are now disconnected and geographically dispersed. Seismic changes in technology have altered the way that we communicate, and today's Jewish organizations must compete in the attention economy against an onslaught of modern brands and content. As a result of these trends, individuals are less active and engaged in Jewish life, and organizations struggle to connect with their audience. Introducing JLife, an app and web platform that will reconnect individuals with Jewish life. Operating like OpenTable, MindBody, and other user-centric apps, JLife will make it orders of magnitude easier to discover, share, and register for events and activities. By learning each individual's specific interests, JLife curates a personalized feed of content. JLife makes it easy to share events with friends on any digital platform. Users can also RSVP and securely pay for tickets within the app. They can also follow specific organizations, as well as integrate with their existing calendar. JLife empowers organizations to reach their constituents with seamless and effective marketing. Administrators can quickly post their events on the JLife platform, as well as to other social media channels. JLife simplifies the registration and check-in process at events using QR codes. Organizations can access useful data insights to help them improve future programming and make more effective planning decisions for their community. JLife increases Jewish participation and engagement, and this strengthens identity, builds community, and increases philanthropy. As individuals navigate their unique Jewish journey, JLife enables organizations to share data in a manner that is transparent, voluntary, and secure. JLife abides by two guiding principles: collaboration across the community and user-centric design. To ensure that JLife addresses the needs of users, we will continue to work collectively with local Jewish organizations. We've also hired a world-class design team to create an engaging and intuitive experience. Individuals and community leaders are getting excited about JLife due to its potential to make a transformative difference in our community. JLife will be launched, tested, and refined in Detroit and Montreal due to their vibrant and cohesive Jewish communities. After this beta testing phase, JLife can be rolled out to other Jewish communities as well, and doing so will give the local convening organization a tremendous value add to their entire community. We are committed to ensuring that JLife will be a dynamic and truly meaningful solution to the challenge of strengthening Jewish connection and engagement in local communities.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to echo the sentiments of the entire panel, thanking JFNA for putting together what I would call an unprecedented Jewish gathering in unprecedented times. And I think it's an opportunity for all of us to step back and reflect on what the past few months have meant to us collectively as a Jewish world in both North America, Israel, and across the world. I wanted to take us back probably 24 months before the pandemic hit and allow us to reflect for a second on where our Jewish institutions were, where we were in terms of collaboration, where we were in terms of meeting our vision, our mission, because the JLife platform is not born out of COVID. In fact, it was a project that we began in 2017 in discussions with the Detroit Federation. We had a problem that we wanted to solve for. And as federations and Jewish organizations, we have many problems that we try and resolve for. But this particular one stated that we wanted more Jewish people doing more Jewish things more of the time. And the question was, how do we go about doing so when we understand that the consumer, the Jew at the center, if you would, was distracted by the technology which is out there today? the apps, and the ability to interact with so many various aspects of society through social media that we really weren't having a platform in engaging. So with the Detroit Jewish community, we began an inter-community collaboration. We wanted to collaborate on a big bet with high risk. We had shared objectives with a shared mission. And we understood that cross-border would allow us to think outside of our immediate communities. We could think bigger, we could scale, we could understand what the challenges and opportunities were, and we could try and reflect off each other to become better at what we're doing. And the principle of J-Life as a platform is actually the intra-community collaboration. It is necessarily about shedding the legacy anxieties and insecurities of collaboration. It's about understanding that we will be competing for audiences, but allowing them at the center to choose how to navigate their Jewish journey. It's partnering with unusual partners. And during COVID, we've done many of those partnerships as a necessity, but J-Life was going to do it as an opportunity. We understand that we don't speak to 100% of our target audience, but 100% of our target audience use smart devices and applications which we could get into the market with. We want to meet our audience where they're at. We want to allow them to engage and give them the opportunity to chart their Jewish journey through the community. We're going to be using predictive technology to understand how they interact with what we do. And the we is not the Federation or the Y or the JCC, but the environment or the ecosystem that is the Jewish community of either Montreal or Detroit or wherever that is going to be. It is about becoming a network community, and that is one of the strategic levers of our strategic plan. How do we become networks so that we have the impact we want to have on Jewish community members, understanding that we don't reach all of them, but through the network of organizations that exist, we could. And it's about data-driven decisions, the data that we will be able to glean from this app, understand people's preferences, and being able to push out to them what they would like to do next. Again, the consumer at the center will allow us to be a success because they will define their role for the future. I'd like to now introduce Brian Siegel, representing the JCC in Detroit.
I have decided in this moment that I don't like following Yair because he's so darn charismatic and makes me feel less so. And as a result, I'm choosing not to collaborate. I'm withdrawing and I'm going to take my ball and go home. On some level, the pandemic is asking us this question. Are we taking our traditional ball and going home? Or are we going to take a chance, be vulnerable to change and collaborate? As representatives of all of our institutions ultimately engaged in the noble quest of building Jewish community, that is what we must decide. J-Life is a grand community experiment in collaboration and requires institutional vulnerability to be open to change for the benefit of our 3,000-year-old experiment in building Jewish community. As Yair noted, the federations in Montreal and Detroit had to decide that working together to build something world-class was more important than building something less alone. That meant giving up control and compromise and sharing kavod. On the organizational level, the Jewish organizations, especially the large and more successful ones, had to decide that the win-win that J-Life proposes, that building greater engagement was more important than cementing their relative status in the prior platform. On some level, that is what J-Life proposes, that more engagement is more important than who gets credit for providing the program. On the end user level, people in our communities, thank God, are desperate to connect. But on an increasing level, they don't want to connect on the traditional platforms that have been connecting us for generations. Further, they are willing to tolerate friction and engagement. To illustrate, I'm going to tell an embarrassing story. I go and get Starbucks every day, and I order my Starbucks on the Starbucks app. One day, I don't know why, that app was down. Okay, so I should walk into the store like I'd been doing for year after year after year, but no, I drove around the block, until the app came back and started working again. I use this example because from the end user standpoint, we must deliver programs without friction. We can't be asking our customers to re-enter information, payment information. They want to be able to tell their friends easily that what they're doing. We can't continue to send out 10 printed postcards that communicate to my daughter the same way we communicate to my father. The marketplace, even those who want to engage, won't tolerate inadequate technology and delivery of program. J-Life asks the following questions of our institutions and the community we aim to build. Are we going to be inclusive or exclusive? Are we going to be open-minded and vulnerable enough to pivot from our traditional platforms for engagement that the seismic changes occasioned by the pandemic demand? Or are we going to stick our heads in the sand and double down on traditional platforms? Are we finally and collectively going to place mission above brand? I think that our donors are demanding it, and our community deserves that we authentically and on a cellular level collaborate. J-Life proposes this type of collaboration. Thank you, JFNA, and I just want to say on a personal level, we were the beneficiary of the great work of Jay Criff, and I wish our JCC had been involved in Summer in the Cloud. What great examples of collaboration. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to welcome everybody back, and thank you all to all the panelists for really insightful remarks. And this is going to be the beginning of our conversation. What we're going to do right now is we're going to bring all 325 of you who are part of this conversation as well into the conversation with us. We're going to put up some poll questions, and we're going to ask you as the poll questions come up to click on the answer that most represents your viewpoint. And then we'll be able to see the poll of how the 325 people who joined us for this session think about and approach collaboration. Rob, are you ready to put up the poll? Great. So when you hear the word collaboration or partnership, how does it make you feel? Just click on the response that most reflects how you feel when you hear collaboration, partnership. We also want to know about the collaborations you've been involved in as an organization and as a leader. Have they mostly been within your own sector with similar organizations, or have they been across sectors with organizations that are different from you? And last, we want to know whether the collaborations that you are participating in and seeing in your community were already in the works pre-COVID, in other words, ongoing collaborations, or things that came together as a result of the unique circumstances of COVID. So take one moment to plug in those answers. And in a second, Rob is going to be able to show us the results. Great. Rob, are we able to pull up the results? Wonderful. So first of all, it's good to know that most of you feel very excited and curious about collaboration, and very few of you feel worry or any of the more negative feelings. So it's exciting to see that that clearly was what brought people to this conversation today. And interesting, there seems to be an almost half and half split between the types of collaborations we've been involved in, whether they've been of like organizations or of organizations that have differences. And as we go into our conversation with our panelists, we might want to spend some time on that. Where did those likenesses or differences enable collaboration? And maybe in some places, where did they create some friction in the collaboration? And lastly, and encouragingly, a lot of us were involved in different types of collaboration before COVID, but a nice third have had some collaborations start as a result of what's going on now. So that really is some great context setting for our conversation with our panel. What we want to do is, first of all, pull some of the questions from the Q&A that you've been dropping in there. And I'm going to ask Beth to come off mic and maybe throw a question or two out to the panel.
Yeah, thanks, Eliza, and thanks, everyone. This has been a great hour. We have a couple of different questions, so I'm gonna go one at a time. first of all, there was a question about family services and summer in the cloud. And what I actually want to do is sort of zoom up from that. The question was basically, did you have a chance to reach out to family services? And what I want to do is use that question to ask a bigger question, which is which stems from the time, which is we're moving incredibly quickly. How do we acknowledge the fact, the reality that we're working in some collaborations, but sort of not every collaboration that we possibly could, even though we know that those collaborations would be good for the project in the moment. Again, we're just moving so quickly. How do we balance all of that at the same time?
I'm going to let any panelist who's interested in that kind of put a hand up, and we'll call on you. Who wants to talk a little bit about how you decided which partners to engage and which partners you weren't able to engage in the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in. I appreciate the frame of the question, right? And I think all of us alluded to the following, a comment, I believe, which is that we went to the places where we already had pre-existing relationships. And so, this wasn't just something that was all done because of COVID. This was done because there was a relative amount of trust and respect amongst a certain group of people already. I will quote the prior chair of the board of the Jim Joseph Foundation, my friend and colleague Dan Safir, who often, just uses the line, "It's all about relationships." And it's really not a throwaway line. It's really very true. So I think that's, one of the other places, because I think it requires an incredible amount of trust. And you can't develop trust quickly. Trust has to be developed over time. And so that was really the payoff. The payoff was the investment in prior relationships that allowed this to happen.
Thanks, Barry. Oh, am I interrupting?
No. Anyone else want to?
I'm gonna pivot a little bit and ask a different question, which is this. The direct question is, 25 years ago, Shoshana Cardin said that we must become high tech without losing our ability to remain high touch. Panelists, thoughts? And I'll just add, this is certainly a question about J-Life, but I think it's also a question about summer in the cloud and our general, operating systems right now. How do we become high tech without losing our ability to become high touch?
I'll just start answering that question. It has many possible responses, but I'd say there was a catchphrase that during COVID was pretty prevalent, and that's contact before content. At a time of COVID, people had very emotional and personal needs, and we needed to be there for them to establish contact. Content, of course, our standards are high. We want to have the highest educational goals, but we needed to be there for them first. So I think whatever we do, however we become more technologically savvy, there has to be that human connection to be able to establish that trust that Barry was talking about before, and to know that for our families and communities, to know that we are there for them first and foremost, and that the technology is a means for us to be able to achieve that goal of connection and that goal of being together. We were able to agree that that was what Summer in the Cloud wanted to do. We had a lot of phone calls to the families. It was not that we just promoted a program. There were phone calls. There was support for many families that had children with special needs and inclusion needs. And we focused on those families very, very intentionally because we wanted to be able to offer that support in an intentional way. So I would say contact before content was an important premise for us.
In terms of J-Life, I asked you to imagine the following. Imagine all 40 organizations in Detroit or Montreal or wherever, maybe even in the country someday, all subscribing to the same registration vehicle. And as a result, the end user has a constant feed in the programs of the programs that they've curated. And they're sharing them with friends. And they're constantly being reminded of what a dynamic Jewish community they're a part of, both locally and potentially nationally. So on some level, while technology is providing a platform for this type of sharing, the real magic of J-Life is very high touch. It's actually an amplification of connection in a way that takes away friction. So the focus of J-Life is to take away friction and add touch. So I think that's the technology that specifically augments connection.
And if I may just add to what Brian was saying is, again, it's about the client at the center, right? So we're built as institutions and organizations that see themselves as the organization at the center. The change management that we're doing here is about how do we see the client at the center and their journey being the one that determines the technology. And that's the curated journey that they're going to take through the app and therefore through the city, the community. I see some questions that ask whether this can cross many communities. The idea is, of course, the idea is that if you are part of the app, you could move from Montreal to Detroit to Chicago eventually, or Cincinnati, and have the same experience in whatever community you're coming to. So the idea is very much curated for the individual at the center. And I'll just add, because I saw the question coming up on the screen, you know, when do we expect J-Life to be fully operational? We're in the beta testing phase right now. I would say by second quarter 2021, we'd expect this to come online in Montreal and Detroit, and then we can figure out how to, of course, grow the user base across North America.
So let me pivot a second. There are a couple of questions about sort of two halves of the same whole, I think. One is about deeply entrenched, in organizations that are deeply entrenched in competition. They not only don't have the trust that Barry described with other organizations, they have the opposite of trust, or they did prior to COVID. How do those organizations confront this new reality? How do they operate in this new reality? How do they enter into a new culture? And then there's a cousin to that, which is what happens when COVID is over? Are we going to go back to our starting points? And what are you foreseeing?
I don't want to monopolize, but I think there is no going back. I think the genie is out of the bottle. And I believe that organizations when we have a pandemic that are on the cusp of change, open and vulnerable to real, authentic change. And I think that the new model, the new paradigm, the paradigm shift, if I had to describe it, and we're undergoing at our JCC, is going from a model of JCCs as a provider of space, safe space, to JCCs as an engine, a collaborative engine for engagement. And I personally believe that our donors will demand that we be the vulnerable, risk-taking, entrepreneurial organizations that will take advantage of this crisis to do a pivot that leverages the whole community to a more engaged one. I think they're going to demand it.
Great. I'm going to put out a few questions to the panel. And again, anyone who wants to can take these on. I think we want to dive a little deeper into the nature of collaboration and some of the how-tos that happen at in a collaborative process. So you all described processes that brought together lots of different partners at different levels of the collaboration. Partners come to the table with different priorities and different needs. How do you make decisions efficiently? Anyone want to take that on? Efficient decision-making with a large varied group?
I can jump in. Our group actually at the end of the day was not so large, but I think, obviously the trust and the relationships. I think in our case also in JCRIF, everyone making decisions has been doing this job for a very long time. So the pace has been a little relentless, I think. We meet every week, and the funders among them meet several times a week for the loan program, the grant program, for other meetings. So there's just a tremendous amount of information sharing and quick decision making that's based on experience. But then also, I think what one of the real part of the real magic of JCRIF has also been a willingness for people to do things differently than they usually do. So partly that is the process point and how quickly we're moving, and also just the willingness to look at other organizations, other sectors that the funders don't usually support.
Anyone else want to talk to decision making?
I will. I'll talk to decision making, and I actually wanted to add on to that the first part of Beth's question earlier about, is there a possibility to build relationships and trust on the fly in the midst of all of this? So I think in the case of Summer in the Cloud, and I think it's illustrative generally about collaboration, I think it's important from a decision-making perspective to acknowledge that someone has to make the decision. And it's not always going to be everybody. In the case of Summer in the Cloud, 18 Jewish community institutions with 18 camp directors did not have the capacity to come to consensus on each and every aspect of the reality here. And so we actually made the firm agreement up front that we were going to have a leadership structure of 3 institutions that were going to be the decision makers, and that they were going to create a structure that others were going to buy into with clarity and transparency. And I think that worked really effectively. I think to the other question that was raised, I do think there's an opportunity to build that kind of trust when it comes from that transparent framework of understanding at first, because the kind of intensity associated with these collaborations has the possibility of building really inspiring relationships and really inspiring trust. We saw in Summer in the Cloud, for example, that our staff team, some of which barely knew each other, were a deep, abiding, connected team by the end of this. And I imagine that as a microcosm of similar opportunities.
Great. Anyone else want to talk about decision? Okay, then let's go to, we've mentioned some of the ingredients for good partnership. Everyone has mentioned trust and communication and things like goal setting and, you know, a collaborative process of determining outcomes. Anything else you would put in the mix as your like important ingredients for good partnership?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Aliza. You know, one of the things that I've been reflecting on a little bit, and I touched on it, I think just in the use of one word in my presentation at the beginning, was the notion of selflessness, which I think requires some level of prioritization, you know, by each of the collaborating partners. In other words, you know, what were the must-haves for the Jim Joseph Foundation to be part of this, and what were kind of not the must-haves. And that requires an internal process that you have to go through very quickly to decide, you know, what we're willing to give up on and what we're not willing to give up on. And you know, the very term partnership and collaboration is often positive, and it has you have to weigh up the other sides of it, right? Which is, what are you willing to give up on? Because if you get involved in a partnership, if it's with one other person, you're giving up 50%. If it's 2 other people, you're giving up 33%. So what is that? I think is a pretty a key thing. And I think I'll finish by saying the plus of all of this is that it actually makes you think about what is the most crucial thing to you, right? And not everything is equal. And I think that's actually a good internal exercise that we should be going through, consistently.
And if I may just, I just wanted to echo what Barry was saying. You know, when we started 2 years ago sitting with Detroit, you know, what are those things that we both agree on as 2 communities? What are the things that we may have differences on, and what are we willing to let go in order to move the agenda forward? Because we both had the same question. What we're trying to resolve for. So what do we agree on? What we don't? Let's find a way to, what can we let go of? What can Detroit let go of in order to move this forward? And that was the key to the selflessness. And I think Barry just nailed it with that sentence.
Felicia?
I was going to say something very similar, that what we're talking about here is an acceptance of difference also, and a willingness to say, you know, we may not agree on our priorities, or, you know, but there are things, we're going to come together around the things that we agree on. And I would humbly suggest this is something that the world needs a lot more of now, not just in philanthropy and Jewish organizational life, but a real acceptance of, you know, viewpoint diversity as much as other kinds of diversity.
Great. I want to shift us to surprises and hiccups. Is anyone willing to share a story either of something unexpected that happened that you needed to navigate collaboratively, or a little hiccup in the process that you had to kind of come together around?
I mean, I'll just answer. I'll just answer generally, right? That you know, but not specifically, because the reality to the answer is that was that, you know, there were obstacles every second of every day when we got it all going, right? And so therefore, you know, it again goes to that spirit, right? We were, you know, not to, you know, it really is the most apt metaphor. We were building the plane and flying it at exactly the same time. And so that required, you know, everybody involved to, you know, what I, you know, the Jewish value of dan lechat zchut, like of giving people the benefit of the doubt of you know, that the intention was needed across the board amongst the collaborative funders, but also amongst the team. The way that I worked during the first couple of months was very foreign for the team that I have the privilege to work with, right? And so, you know, letting people understand that they're really trying to give people the benefit of the doubt was a really crucial thing, and that mindset was allowed us to get over a myriad of obstacles that we that we foresaw. And then I just wanted to just reflect on one other quick thing that was mentioned before. You know, the more partners, the longer it takes. And I was taken by Alan and Martine's commentary about, you know, there was like a few people who were really in it, and then it got broadened out. And I think both sets of these people deserve a tremendous amount of kavod. And I think JCRIF was similar. There was a few of us that were really in it from the very beginning. And then the others that joined a little bit later, you know, they deserve the same amount of kavod because they were willing to buy into something that was already a little baked, not fully baked by any stretch of the imagination, but more baked. And that's the only way that you can actually move forward in a time of crisis, I think.
I'll add just a few comments to that in terms of Elisa's question. What surprised me is the generosity of individuals and organizations during this time. And I really mean it. When we decided that we were not going to be able to run our in-person camps, there was a lot of effort in trying to communicate that nicely to the families and explain the rationale and run them through the whole process. And many families, even though they might have lost their own jobs, were willing to say, okay, we're going to continue investing in you. And if we had already deposited some money for camp this year, it's going to be a donations for you to continue doing the social services work that you're doing, or we're going to make a credit for next summer because we believe in you. So there was a lot of surprising positivity when it comes to generosity. And I can't even start to reference what UJ and JCRIF were in that sense. They were really outstanding partners in helping us and investing in that relationship and investing in that collaboration. That to me is also, and pivoting a little bit to the question you asked before, Elisa, what are the ingredients for a collaboration? I think there is an epic narrative of what we've done the last couple of months. It has been so difficult on a personal level, on an institutional level, on a financial level, that those of us that were able to really ride the wave of this is a historical moment and we want to be on the right side of history. We want to build on this opportunity and do right for our community, even though it's really hard, even though it means we're not going to sleep at night. This is the time for us to rise to the occasion, to be inspired and to inspire others. I think that narrative, which is not manipulative, it's real. That's how all of us feel. And I think the hundreds of people that are watching us today, that's what makes them go to work every day inspired and not to give up on the circumstances. That was able to inspire donors. It was able to inspire organizations to be able to say, we support this. And even if you're not going to have 2,000 kids coming to your camp, we believe in the fact that you want to do something affordable for your communities to benefit during the summer. So that epic narrative, I think, played a big role in why all of us got involved into these endeavors.
So I actually want to turn and ask a question of you, Martine and Alan, particularly for Summer in the Cloud. This was clearly of these, of the collaborations, this was born out of a necessity of, you know, the uncertainty of what was going to happen with in-person camp. Can you see anything that has come out of this that you will be taking into the future summers, even if you go back to, you know, being able to each organization have its own camp on its own facility in person? What are some of the things that you feel have come out of the collaboration that might last well beyond COVID? And then I actually want Jake Griff to answer the question as well.
So I could start, and I'm sure Martine has thoughts also. I'll start with two things. I think, first and foremost, these bonds of collaboration between our camp professionals, our colleagues, will be with us for years to come. And there are already more collaborations happening between our agencies that will be rolled out in the forthcoming months because of Summer in the Cloud, which is really exciting. And I want to also recognize from a programmatic perspective, there were some profound learnings for us as institutions and as Jewish educators. In the case of Summer in the Cloud, we saw really inspiring effects of the screen in a way that one might imagine were counterintuitive. So Martine mentioned that we paid particular attention to young people with disabilities at Summer in the Cloud. And we do that in our in-person camps typically as well. But in this case, one of the elements that we specifically saw were the ability for a child to be able to turn off their screen and modulate their experience to, in their own safe environment, work on a particular new skill, think through a particular answer to a question. When they were ready to turn on their screen and be back and present, created this whole new structure to allow children to be fully seen, to not feel the pressures of answering in a particular moment. And for our educators, it was a really impressive tool that has challenged them to think, how might I utilize what we've learned through this new modality to inform in-person camp?
Alan covered most of what I wanted to say, so it shows that we now think very similarly. I will just add the ability to create community among staff and participants virtually. I think it's been underestimated. It's not the same. It's never going to be the same, but it is possible and it is real. And I think in terms of replication, we set in motion a series of processes and mechanisms through which whenever we want to reignite them, they're there, both on a personal level, on an institutional level. And number three, we were able to reduce fears in terms of how our competition is going to be using the information that we gather, because there's a database. We now know that we can trust each other. And I think those three pieces really helped us for whatever we want to do moving forward.
It's wonderful, Martine and Alan. Felicia and Barry, are there things from the JCRIF collaboration that you think will last beyond the COVID emergency?
I think we would just agree with everything that was just said. You know, when you set these processes in motion and you have people talking to each other regularly and sharing information regularly, whatever the institutional, whether the particular institutional form of JCRIF persists, which it actually won't, because our goal was always to have the money spent by the end of this year, either loaned out or granted out by the end of the calendar year, that particular entity won't persist, but it has just set off an infinite number of ripple effects in terms of how the foundations work together, how quickly foundation processes move, who's funding what and for what reasons, and not to mention, of course, all the institutional collaborations that we've been able to support, which will also, I mean, I feel like we're in a profound moment of change for the Jewish community, and everything, Martine, I loved what you said a few minutes ago about recognizing the historic nature of this. Everything that we're doing now is going to have ripple effects into the future, and the more positive, constructive work and energy we can put out there, just the more positive impact that's going to have long term.
Great, and I want to reframe this question a little bit for Brian and Yair, because this was conceived of before COVID and everything that kind of came with it. But it is also, a lot of what is featured on the app is in-person activity, which is not possible right now. How are you even rethinking J-Life in this moment? And what do you see as the future of J-Life navigating all the uncertainty that's ahead for the many organizations that have come together to put their activities and plug into the app?
So I would say that we shared with you the short video. We have a 6-minute video that actually talks about the COVID pivot, because obviously in a world where live events are not taking place, the app has now been configured to work with the Zooms and every digital platform that you can imagine, to provide the ability for organizations to dial into the app that way. So we understand that the world has had a seismic shift, and we are now pivoting to meet that seismic shift because it's critical. I would also say that while J-Life is a concept that is a strategic decision that we made in 2017, the COVID crisis has, as it has everywhere, has amplified our ability to execute on that, because the unlikely partnerships that we have created, the ability to open conversations with and dialogues, which have created a whole new world of trust. And I think, we talked about selflessness. The other great aspect that we have to remember is trust. Trust defines the ability to do all of this. And through the COVID pandemic crisis and the relationships that we've built trust that has opened doors to other conversations. And Brian, if you wanted to add, sorry, I jumped in, but.
No, not at all. So I totally agree. I'm not going to spend much more time. I'm just going to say that the pivot that we made into online engagement only amplifies the connective opportunity that exists. So we would have programs, at the JCC, and we're now going to put all of our programs that are in person, both online as well, that we're getting more attendance to. So we're getting 200 people at programs that we're getting 50 people to. Some of that is people are very available. But another possibility is that the pandemic has created an entirely new channel for being in person at things without physically being in person things. Not that it will dominate or be the only one, but there are many ways that will add to the amplification of connectivity and the desire to have a platform where you can have all these different vehicles for engagement.
Great. I just want to announce to all of our participants that the chat is now open and you can join in the chat as well. And I would love to hear, I know 325 people, we can't unmute everybody, but if you have some thoughts that are rising to the top now that you've heard these 3 inspiring examples of collaboration, if you're thinking about ways that this may impact your own approach to collaborating, we'd love for you to drop that in the chat and share with each other. And we're not going to have a lot of time for additional questions, but what I'm going to urge my panelists to do is scan the questions that are in the Q&A, scan the questions that are coming in the chat, and if there are particular individuals you want to respond to, let's make sure that we connect with them offline and have conversations with them. I just want to open it up in case anyone on the panel has something burning they want to say before we start to wrap up. If you've got it, we've got a few minutes.
Lisa, I just have one more aspect that's interesting, because I just thought about it as Barry and Felicia were talking about donor collaboratives. So in Montreal, this all actually started as a donor collaborative about a vision about what we call the passport to Jewish life, how to get more Jewish people to do more Jewish things more of the time. It's a unique partnership of family and public foundations. Our Jewish Community Foundation and Federation not only is a partner, but is the backbone basically acting on all this. And J-Life has now taken a life of its own with partnerships from various foundations across North America who have been supporting putting this app together. So it has another level of partnership and collaboration that has been existing as well throughout this process. I just thought I would add that.
There's a question that's come in the chat about what is something you gave up to achieve your partnerships that you're involved in. And that does seem to be an important question. And there's also, I can't reference it, but Beth, if you come off mic and explain the Parnassa question to me, we'll put that in the mix too.
I think Bluma's question about what was given up is a similar question, actually. There's the big question of what was given up, and underneath that is there's fear, and particularly there's often or sometimes fear that people will lose their jobs, people for whom I'm responsible will lose their jobs, I will lose my job, and that's, so yeah, I'd love to dive into that for a couple minutes.
Great. Does anyone want to take on the loss question and the what you have to sacrifice question, and even the existential, could this mean the end of my organization question?
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess from the loss or giving up, which I think funders face is just fundamentally control, right? Nobody voluntarily gives up control, and so in the loan fund, each of the anchor funders put in $10 million, and inputting that $10 million gave up some measure of control, because the Jim Joseph Foundation is certainly loaning money and funding things that it would never have funded before. And I think that goes back again to this notion of selflessness and the notion of, keeping, and I think it actually is a nice tie-in with J-Life and with Summer in the Cloud, which is what all three of these initiatives really have in common is keeping the end user, right, fully and first and foremost in the center of everything. And so the foundations involved in JCRIF have said, look, we're just focused on that piece of the puzzle. And I think we gave that up. I just want to take 10 seconds and just say, JCRIF also speaks, I think, a little bit to the reactive nature of the Jewish community of North America. And we're always trying to solve problems and react to problems. And I think that perhaps in this moment, I've certainly asked myself, how are we going to take this moment to get ready for the next thing and not wait for it to happen? And I think that speaks to collaborations and partnerships and the structure of the community in a large way.
Any final panelist comment before I help us wrap up and go to the finish line?
I would just say that Barry just identified something that we hadn't spoken about in terms of collaboration, which is that it helps you to see the holes in the system. So by bringing together lots of people and sort of aggregating all of their wisdom, the holes emerge. And I also just wanted to make sure to bring up the word humility. I think this is sort of what everyone's saying when we're talking about selflessness, but there's also, you need to come into this with humility and perhaps even more so on the funder side than organizational side, but it's true for all of us to work with other people. You need to be really humble.
Great. I want to thank everybody for coming together for this panel experience. I want to particularly thank our 6 panelists, both for the work you do in the community every day, the work that you did in bringing these collaborations to fruition, and your willingness to come here and share very transparently the ups and the downs and the ins and the outs of that process. I want to thank Beth and JFNA for putting together this really important panel for this moment. I think one of the themes I heard loud and clear throughout the panel is that in times of uncertainty, you're really faced with 2 options. You can kind of hunker down in your own silo, or you can open the doors and open the windows and look to see who's out there and what you could possibly do together. And I think this panel is about the power of that impulse. And the challenges are formidable and they are deep, but together there is so much more that we can accomplish and so much more that can happen than the go it alone mentality. And I was really struck by what people said in the panel today about the relationships that have laid the foundation for this possibility, that, the sort of Rome isn't built in a day. You can't just say, okay, now we're going to collaborate, but you really have to be in a collaborative mindset and practicing the muscles of collaboration all the time, so that when the opportunities that are really high stakes appear, we are ready for them and we have the communication and the trust and the prerequisites to kind of go into that. I really heard a lot here about complementarity and leveraging strengths and being able to build off of one another's capacities. We don't all have to be excellent at everything, but coming together helps us figure out where are we excellent, where are others excellent, and how do we figure that out together. And then I really heard the undertone throughout of all of this of, as Felicia reminded us, humility, vulnerability, letting go, putting mission above everything. Those are really the hallmarks of what makes this kind of collaboration happen. So I want to thank all 325 of you for sticking it out for 90 minutes. I want to thank our 6 panelists, and I particularly want to thank JFNA for making these community-wide conversations possible. We have nowhere else to go to talk across the entire community, and this is really rare and beautiful and wonderful. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Eliza.